Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Better Death Collective podcast. Today we'll be looking at how awesome it is to have a tree planted for us when we die. Then, how awesome it would be to have 1,000 trees planted for us when we die. We think about 1,000 times more awesome. As our guest Matthew Kochmann will explain, reforestation and rewilding is doable, and what a more perfect time to do it than when we die, or better yet, before we die. Matthew's company Transcend has the plan to plant the right trees right where they're needed most. This bold goal of regrowing the woods of the world comes with its fair share of challenges, but with our ability to offset a person's entire lifetime's worth of carbon, how can we not try? Well, trying he is. So let's hear the ins and outs of honoring the dead with new life with our guest Matthew Kochmann.
Good morning, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Better Death Collective with my partner, Matt. Today, we'd like to welcome Matthew Kochmann of New York City, the CEO and founder of Transcend. Matthew is an entrepreneur and a real estate developer dedicated to improving the world around us. And for those who don't know, Transcend is the first company dedicated to reforesting the world by planting people and pets as trees when they die. Launched in October of 2022, Transcend's unique tree burial process is a climate change solution that repurposes the most life-giving natural resources known to mankind, our bodies. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Matthew.
Yeah, very much, Matthew. Sorry, folks, we got a Matt and we got a Matthew, so I'll try not to mix it up here. So what I'd like to do is, Matthew, I'd like to have you tell us a little bit about Transcend and what its overall goals and missions are.
Gotcha. Well, so Transcend, as you mentioned beautifully, we plant people and pets as trees when they die. We're trying to use death and as a kind of inspiration and way of conserving land and reforesting land, trying to tie climate change and our relationship to mortality. I was inspired years ago. I'm sure many of us had seen this like Capsula Mundi tree pod burial thing go viral about 7-8 years ago by these Italian designers. And I'd seen this, tree pod burial thing and immediately was like, oh, of course, I want to be a tree when I die. And sent it to my family and said, when I die, please make sure that I become a tree. I didn't know how that was going to happen or what that would look like, but I just figured they'd have to go figure it out when the time came. And then through like a weird non-circuitous route of career trajectories through real estate development and early Uber employee and all of these different things, and then my own personal spiritual journeys of inquiring about the great mystery of death and digging into that a bit more. I just found myself very curious about this tree burial concept. And so I reached out to the designers in Italy and said, hey, I love this concept. What's the status of it? How can I help you scale this globally? And what became clear was that this was just an idea. That they were industrial designers and they were very good at what they do, but they didn't actually have any idea of how to bring that concept to market. They had no idea that burying people was very much a real estate play and has like a big real estate component to them. They didn't realize that there's a lot of regulations involved in that. And it just kind of became clear that the thing that I had known that I wanted didn't actually exist in reality. And that death in general, kind of the innovation in the end of life space, you start seeing a lot of like the mushroom suit and different cool concepts. And you realize, oh man, these are a bunch of grad student theses or designer pipe dreams. And there was nobody actually bringing the business chops to bring these things to market and bring these into reality. And so it was starting and teasing a conversation around things that could excite people and convince people to engage in a conversation about mortality, yet it wasn't able to actually deliver. And so I was quite disappointed after that conversation and came away from it realizing that I had no intention of going into this space. I had no, would have never guessed it in a million years. But I had a moment where I was just like, the thing that I want for my end of life does not exist. And I have this oddly unique skill set of real estate development and financing experience, plus logistics, regulatory, and disruption of like antiquated industries and kind of how they work. And I just had the unique skill set to go about trying to figure this thing out.
That's so common. I hear that a lot. People who are in this particular type of line of work kind of just fall into it. It's not something that everybody plans for as a kid. You kind of eventually end up there, and once you get there, it just fits. It's just perfect.
Absolutely. I mean, Matt, you and I think, are bird of the same feather, but you're taking it in a different direction, meaning that what I love about what you're doing with Transcend is, over the years with my involvement in the movement, I've seen so many blue sky thinkers, innovators come along, and you hit the nail on the head. No one's really been able to take that formula and really make it work. So, I think that would lead me into my next question. How will Transcend impact the world globally, and why is the impact so vitally important to our planet when it comes to, the process of Transcend and what its promises?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, one of the reasons Ed and I kind of like each other is that we see the world in a similar lens, and I'm one of those people who, when I see a problem, it's hard for me to say, like, ooh, let me try and solve one tiny piece of that problem. When I see a problem, it's like, oh, I want to solve the whole problem. And like, what's the biggest version of that idea that I could try and solve? And so I think, like, when it comes to climate activism and climate progress, I'm as guilty as every other millennial sideline climate activist who's like, this is a big problem, but how the heck do I get involved? Like, where do you even begin? Like, the cognitive dissonance of just the overwhelming nature of the problem it paralyzes us to inaction. And so for me, when I saw, even before coming back to this concept, I'd seen this research by Tom Crowther out of Switzerland that was talking about planting 1.2 trillion trees globally as a solution for sequestering enough carbon out of the atmosphere to kind of blunt the most harmful effects of climate change. And if we were able to plant 1.2 trillion trees in specific geographies across the globe within the next decade, we would be able to draw down enough carbon to really have a huge dent in this problem. What I loved about that is it was like a clear and solid number of like a target. And it wasn't dependent on Elon Musk inventing some magical carbon sequestration technology that doesn't exist yet. It was a very clear and simple thing. And so for me, like, when it comes to this concept, like, when you're thinking about any product or any startup or any like e-commerce experience, you think about the total addressable market, the investors like words like TAM and whatnot. And in actuality, when it comes to death, like, everybody is a potential customer, because every single one of us is ultimately going to die. And so when you're talking about global scale solutions and like trying to create models that tie direct and immediate climate impact, like, death is actually one of those consumer purchase behaviors that every single person is going to have to interact with or make a decision around. And for me, it was a question of like, how do we create a model that encourages people to, one, start thinking about death sooner because of what we know philosophically and spiritually of like just the power of engaging with mortality and healing whatever fear and resistance you might have around mortality, and how that helps you live a more present and joy-filled life. And so, like, how do you bring people to a conversation that they're inherently resistant to? Well, you need to create something that's inspiring, that, a solution to something that is terrifying to some, but also giving them something that's aspirational and inspirational. And so this idea of going back to nature, this idea of becoming a tree is a real it's one of the few solutions that lands with most everybody in a of course, like, yeah, that doesn't seem terrifying. Like, oh, I don't want to be buried because I'm claustrophobic. Oh, I don't want to be buried because cemeteries, just look at them, like they're just not, that's not where I want to be. I don't want to be that type of land use is not interesting to me. Oh, I don't want to be incinerated in flame cremation. And so it's like being a tree is like this aspirational thing of, ooh, that sounds nice. That's like a great metaphor of bringing people back into the circle of life. And so what we've done is we've created a model where by getting people to be inspired by that concept and raise their hand and say, oh, I want to be a tree eventually. I don't want to die tomorrow, but when I do die, which is inevitable, I would love to go back into the earth and become a tree. What we do is we've tied that decision to an accelerated impact of reforestation now. And so we've partnered with a nonprofit called One Tree Planted, where we plant 1,000 trees at the time of reservation in reforestation projects globally. And they source all of these very high impact reforestation projects because there's good reforestation and there's bad reforestation. Good reforestation is a process of taking land and rewilding it with diverse ecosystems, not planting monocrop trees. And so we partner with them to do the good types of reforestation. And what's amazing is that by planting 1,000 trees today, hopefully 30, 40, 50, 60 years ahead of when you're actually going to become a tree yourself, your decision about your end of life wishes is having a tangible and immediate sequestration effect today and for the rest of your life. So by the time that you actually end up becoming a tree 50 years from now, your decision will have drawn down enough carbon to almost completely eliminate your lifetime carbon footprint. That's a pretty cool model. And when you start looking at it on a larger scale, on a global scale, really what you need is 1 in 7 people to decide that I don't want cremation and I don't want traditional burial. I would like to do a tree burial. And with our model, if 1 in 7 people globally choose tree burial, we'll be able to single-handedly plant the 1.2 trillion trees needed to kind of like blunt these like most harmful effects of climate change.
That kind of brings up the question about the process. You know, you mentioned geographically specific areas that need this type of reforestation. Where are these places where the reforestation is needed, and are you in communication with activists in these areas and setting up, creating finding the space where this is most needed and having kind of the boots on the ground to actually enact this plan?
Yeah. So, when it's talking about specific areas, it's not kind of like, certain latitudes, bands across the world. It really is in every region and every area. There's just finding the types of land that can accept mass reforestation and where soil can really take on the brunt of like new introduction of root systems and mycorrhizal networks and all of those things to support a diverse ecosystem. And so when we're assessing sites, I mean, like we have a very rigorous process by which we're assessing geographies right now. And the factors at play are, yes, very much regulatory. As you both know, cemetery law, funeral home law, pre-need law, all regulated as separate industries and all regulated completely differently in all 50 states. And so, when you start getting into the local end state, there's lots of layers of regulatory that we need to navigate. So we have a framework of how we're assessing geographies based on regulatory complexity. And then in addition, it's also assessing sites based on their viability for supporting, a rewilding process. And so for us, I think like one of the things that's important to me is the definition of conservation. For me and for people who think like me, there's a definition around conservation that isn't buying a piece of land and then freezing it exactly as it is. in perpetuity. That is kind of an old school view of conservation that is it doesn't allow land to live up to its potential. And so what we're doing, and what a lot of there is a movement towards this rewilding movement, this reforestation movement, is finding and identifying pieces of land that we can put into conservation easements, perpetually protect them, and then create rewilded ecosystems on this land, make them just thrive with life and thrive with different species. That's a really inspiring and exciting definition of conservation for me. And what's really important about that is that buying land and just reforesting it and not putting it in a conservation easement is kind of a waste, because what ends up happening in those situations is that corporations will buy land, reforest the land, and then sell the logging rights for 50 years down the line. And so, what exactly is the point of that? That's why we don't have any old growth forests in the US anymore. And that's why they're dwindling at such an insane rate. What we need to do is we need to buy land, put it into conservation easements, and then rewild it and create these inspirational and diverse and thriving ecosystems.
No, I couldn't agree more, Matt. And what I love about the Transcend process is that, we at Destiny plant a tree as a living memorial, but we cannot go beyond that one living tree. And my vision has always been, with prearrangement in particular, that why would you not want to make a larger statement with your life while you're living? So the idea of planting 1,000 trees, to me, is absolutely wonderful. That's the gift that you're giving back, and I think everyone should consider that. So I commend that. I also commend the idea that the old school conservation image of just locking up one space. Your vision is limitless, and that's the way it should be.
First, let's start out with the tree burial process and what exactly we're talking about here. Just to be clear, all we're doing is green burial as it was meant to be done and as it was done for millennia. Natural burial, putting a body directly into the ground with no non-biodegradable materials. And so what we've optimized for and what we're calling tree burial is we have worked with some of the world's foremost soil experts and human decomposition experts to identify the exact layering and kind of way to perform a burial to optimize for the nutrient transfer of decomposing human remains into the roots of trees. So what we do is we dig about a 3.5 foot grave. Obviously, it varies based on geography and soil concentration, but 3.5, not 6 feet, for the oxygenation levels of the soil. So we dig on average about a 3.5 foot grave. We line the base of the grave with carbonaceous materials, whether that be locally upcycled wood chips or hay. Then we lower in the body. The body is shrouded in a biodegradable flax linen shroud. Then we layer on some additional carbonaceous material, then about a foot of soil, local soil. And then we introduce our unique blend of different types of mycorrhizal, endomycorrhizal, and fungi. And so what this does is, in the process, I thought I was looking for some magical fairy dust to help with the decomposition of human remains. And through the research and the process, what I found is that what we were actually looking for is essentially steroids for the roots of the tree. And so what this mycorrhizal fungi does is we plant a 2 to 4 year old adolescent tree, not a seed, not a sapling, on top of the body. And underneath we have these mycorrhizal networks. And what that does, and the reason we're selecting that age of tree, is because there's an intense flush of nutrients released from the body in the first year of decomposition. And there's high levels of alkalinity and high levels of ammonium gas release. And so what we need to do is not overwhelm the tree. And by planting, thinking of it as a teenage or pubescent tree, it's ready to indulge in all the really good nutrients while also has a base level of strength to withstand the initial flush of more difficult nutrients. And so the mycorrhizal networks reach down into the soil, attach onto the roots of the root tendrils of the tree, reach down in the soil and suck up all of the carbon, phosphorus, phosphates, nitrates, nitrogen, and like take it up into the roots of the tree. And in this way, your biology literally transfers into the roots of these trees. And so that's kind of the scientific aspect of our planting and what tree burial is as a process. Totally natural, totally optimized and beautiful. And we're optimizing for the health and longevity of these trees. From a consumer standpoint, in terms of what the experience looks like, what we're trying to accomplish here is a one-stop shop for families, because families are ultimately most important. We're very obsessed with pre-need and dealing with it, having people opt in and make choices for themselves in advance of their death, because our product really helps engage in that exploration and conversation around one's individual relationship with their mortality, which is very, very important. But after somebody dies, it's the family that has to do, that the brand ends up dealing with a lot of the customer service and making that experience for the family is really easy. And so for us, what that looks like is being the one-stop shop, the quarterback of the entire process. So when a family member dies, we arrange for the transport of the body. We arrange for all of the death certificate filings, all of the paperwork. We process the body, do whatever little prep is needed, because we're not embalming, we're not doing anything like that. There's minimal prep that's needed. We arrange for a ceremony in our forests. We have a service space that we host these ceremonies. If families have customizations based on religious beliefs, they can add those customizations on our site, or if they need to have a ceremony elsewhere because of religious requirements, they can do that, and then we will bring the body to our site. And then we facilitate the planting and the perpetual maintenance and care of that land and that site. And so all of this is included in a one-stop shop fee, so that families don't have to worry, and they don't have to think about like, did I forget about this? I think there is that inherent feeling of being upsold during an emotionally vulnerable moment. And like, listen, we all know there's so many incredible people in this industry who do this for heartfelt reasons. And that doesn't change the consumer perception that like, this is a sticky consumer purchase situation because of the emotions involved in that moment. And so what you really want to take out of it is any sort of feeling of being upsold, or any sort of feeling of like, oh, there's more, or there's surprises, that I didn't read the fine print. We want to just make it as clear and easy and straightforward as possible so that everything is taken care of for families.
So what I can say is I really do appreciate what you're doing, Matthew, with Transcend. To have that one-stop shop is really, really important to families, in particular when they just don't want to be thinking in the moment of their grief. So to know that everything is covered is a really big relief for them. And that would bring me to my next question for you would be, what is Transcend's overall goals concerning the creation of Transcend properties and possibly potential partnerships in existing cemeteries? What were you guys thinking when it comes to, how you grow?
Yeah. So, our process of kind of what we're looking for, I mentioned before about how we're going through a rigorous regulatory review across multiple states while also trying to identify lands that are ready for good types of reforestation. I think like what's difficult for us is we really want to create a very different experience for people where they feel like they're in a forest, not in a cemetery. There is this slight aversion to the traditional tombstones, and even having situations where there are some existing traditional burials, but then existing green burials or new green burials. We want to reinvent spaces and redefine spaces and rebrand spaces where they're just as far from anything people think about when they think about cemeteries. And so for us, that means about like just buying land and reforesting it and designing them meticulously. Like I have a landscape architecture degree from Cornell University. And so like, that's where I get to bring a lot of my design knowledge and my fun of like, how do we design spaces to optimize for families navigating these forests and experiencing and indulging in awe and inspiration and feeling deeply connected to nature and in turn their family members. And so it's like a fun process of thinking through how do you design these spaces from a landscaping perspective for that purpose. And so what's also fun is like when we start looking at properties and we assess from a permacultural level and a horticultural level, like what types of trees and what types of species that land is excited about and are native to that land, it's running a process of understanding, okay, if we have a 20, 50, 100 acre plot of land, what does that land want in terms of density of trees? You know, like we're not subscribing to just a standard, 1,000 bodies per acre, equation. It's whatever the land is telling us it can accept and over what cadence of time. And so, in an ideal world, we're looking to be selling and offering between 5 and 10 species of trees to our consumers in each geography. And that depends on whatever that geography's native species are. And so, you can think about the consumer experience as opposed to in traditional cemeteries where it's like, oh, I want to be up on the hill, or I want to, this geography is interesting to me. Like, yes, that could be an offering, but people get to have a sense of like, oh, do I want to optimize for geography up on this piece of the hill? Or do I want to optimize for a species of tree that I want to be, which actually grows best in this low-lying meadow or, in this sunny patch here? And so thinking through like the mapping of a piece of land and laying out like where certain species of trees are going to be planted over what cadence of time, and then giving consumers the ability to choose plots, we call them groves at Transcend, choose groves that resonate deeply with them, whether it be for geographic or species related reasons. Like that's where the experience of our forests wants to be more aesthetic and dynamic.
Well, that makes total sense. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I was going to ask, what we're kind of dealing with right now, just from our standpoint, is, we have a kind of an open field, what's kind of a fallow farm field, and our thoughts are, that we could maybe let it go fallow and let those kind of pioneer trees kind of take over a little bit. However, I like what you're saying about actually creating the most ideal environment for awe and for beauty, and actually helping manage this space for the optimal experience for these families and for visitors. What would you say to that? Like, what about just simply allowing the land to go back to nature? Is that not ideal?
Yeah, I mean, letting the land go back to nature, absolutely. I mean, like when you're the fun part is when you buy a piece of land and you're starting to think about designing it, because of just the cadence of how absorption of burials goes is over a longer period of time. You're not planting all these trees at one time, so you need to think about the cadence in which they're going in. And then in the meantime, what types of grasses or shrubbery or different things are you planting, or wildflowers that are really rejuvenating and enriching the soil? Because like that top layer of soil, especially on defunct agricultural pieces of land where like so much of the nutrients have been removed from the soil, like it's amazing what they've learned about planting certain types of grasses. And in just a year or two, that topsoil all of a sudden is hyper enriched again. And so it's like pulling on these different permacultural and rewilding type of practices to really optimize for the health of the land. And then what's interesting and what you're touching on a little bit is something we've been bumping into. We've heard a bunch of our competitors bumping into, and it's this desire. And I get the question all the time. This desire from consumers around like, well, what happens to my tree if it dies? One of the top questions we get all the time. And what's interesting is like, I understand the reason for that question. There's like, oh, I want to be a tree and I want my tree to live forever and thrive. But like, even in that question, there's an attachment to life that is an opportunity to kind of re-navigate and reshift somebody's perspective to one of nature and impermanence and the cycle of life. And like, what we like to do with customers is explain to them that you're really buying a grove. You're buying a piece of land, and we're rewilding that piece of land with your tree. And that tree is we're going to do everything to maintain and optimize and have that tree grow. But like the science of it is that because of how decomposition works, depending on your geography and soil, the nutrients from your biology really only stay in the land for about, at best, 3 to 5 years. And so after that period of time, if say 20 years in, your tree dies, replanting another tree really has nothing to do with your biology. It's really just about memorialization. And so we have specific biodegradable markers that will be, marking those groves. But like, what we try to explain to families is that tree that is grown from your nutrients, that tree is now a possessor of all of your biology as well. And when that tree falls down, that's not a dead tree. That's not a tree that needs removing. That is a piece of biology going back into nature to spark more life, and like, it's a fun exercise I do with my friends when I walk through forests, which is, I point out trees that have fallen over, and I said, do you see a dead tree? Because I don't. Like, when I see a tree that's fallen over, I see a thriving ecosystem of mosses and insects and just different life sparking off of these trees. And so, really rallying people and getting them to understand that, like, your piece of land is getting rewilded and is perpetually protected. And there's going to be many cycles of life on this land above and beyond just your tree, but you're going back into nature, and that nature is cyclical. Yeah, the feedback has been off the charts in terms of positivity. This is definitely a concept that strikes a chord with people, strikes a chord with the media. It's something that is bringing people who are otherwise not comfortable having a conversation about death to a conversation about their own mortality. And it's doing so through aspiration and inspiration as opposed to fear and responsibility. And I think that's like really powerful. And it allows us to start having a pre-need conversation that's urgent and important with people around the world.
Absolutely. And, I know time, all of us, our time is precious. I have just a couple more questions for you here today, Matthew. I guess I'm going to combine one. We'd like to know, what are your hopes for the company? And if you were able to tell us, how you might want to envision how it would look in 5 years, what does that look like in your mind's eye?
Yeah. What I envision for the company is just having beautiful forests across the country, and making this accessible to individuals. Because right now it feels like, I'm kind of the horse in the stable, just chomping at the bit, rare and ready to go in terms of bringing this into reality. And we have a process ahead of us with kind of the land procurement and land zoning, and it's a laborious one, as you know. And so, it's important for me to. My why of building this company is to take something from concept into reality. And it's important for me to execute in a way to quiet the naysayers who have been like, oh, everyone wants to be a tree. They've been pitching being a tree forever, but nobody's ever done it. Like, I'm genuinely doing it. It's in process. And I'm as impatient as everybody else in terms of getting these sites online. But 5 years from now, I'm very excited to have a handful of sites live, but more so like why I've always been drawn to the excuse me, why I've always been drawn to the Green Burial Council is that like we share similar motives and goals, which is like green burial. All we're doing is a form of green burial and a sustainable alternative that is more, is softer, warmer. It invites people to this conversation. And ultimately, like, it's not about being anti-cremation, but it's about us as an industry looking around and saying, hey, people are flocking to cremation. And when you look at the graphs, it's going up and to the right, and it's projected to be at 80 or 85% cremation rates in the US by 2030. That is terrifying. And what's more terrifying about that to me isn't the horrible carbon emissions that get burned for every cremation that gets burned. It's like the fact that people are running towards cremation, not because they want to run towards cremation, it's because they're running away from traditional burial. And they're seeing something that's cheaper, that seems easier, and like, you know, the body is just taken away and I don't have to deal with anything. And so families are choosing this out of financial desperation, out of convenience, out of just like perception that it's more sustainable than traditional burial because of how pollutive traditional burial can be and the bad rap that it's gotten in the past. And it's just like, what we need to do is stem the tide of this tsunami, because cremation is taking people further away from a connection with death and mortality. It's an easy way to just be done with it and, you know, keep distance from the process, while green burial and home funerals and sitting with the body and like reconnecting people to the magic and power of death and grief and like what that can be. That's what green burial has the opportunity to do. And so by offering people an inspirational solution and an aspirational solution that is constructive, creative, a life-giving force, something that like puts them back into the cycle of life, that, you know, ultimately gives them an understanding of like what immortality could really look like when you look at it through the lens of nature. That's interesting and that's exciting to me. And so, yeah, walking lockstep, arm in arm with the Green Burial Council and all the green burial cemeteries and all the conservation cemeteries out there and all the human composting companies, even all the sustainable alternatives, we should be walking arm in arm and trying to stem the tide of cremation, because cremation is taking people further away from death. It's polluting the environment. And I think that is like kind of the shared enemy, if you will, in my eyes.
It's so ironic how some of the most forward-thinking concepts are actually some of the most ancient and back to basics, you know, where, I think that's something that, you know, the Green Burial Council and Transcend and Rewilding have in common. That's another thing. I think that they're very basic. They're not overly complicated. They're ultra simple and just common sense. It's our ancestors, our ancient ancestors, they were a lot smarter than we give them credit for sometimes. I think we've kind of muddied the waters quite a bit in the way we handle death care. Matthew, if you could tell us, what would you like our listeners and our viewers to do? Do you have a website that you would like to direct people to? Are you on social media, or do you have any other outlets, other resources that you'd like to point people towards to better educate them?
Absolutely. Our website is wetranscend.com. Right now our site is live as of last month. And what is offered on the site currently, beyond just understanding about how our process works and how we view death and our relationship to nature, is you can sign up for $100 founding memberships and kind of join the Future Tree movement, as we like to call it. And so what that looks like is we're putting down $100. That's a direct pass-through donation to our nonprofit Reforestation partner, One Tree Planted. It plants 100 trees in reforestation projects across the world. In addition, it locks in deep financial discounts on a tree burial when reservations open next year. And it also gives you a pretty sweet future tree t-shirt that we give to all of our founding members, and a discount on our pet product. And so we also currently have our pet product live, and it's available and it's shipping right now. And what it is it's a kit that has all of the materials that you need: the mycelium mixture, the biodegradable shroud, and instructions on how to perform a tree burial. And it's a direct-to-consumer kit that we send to families when they've lost a pet, and they can plant their pet as a tree either in their backyard or a piece of land that they have rights to. And we give them all the ingredients and instructions on how to do that properly. So the pet kits are live today. And you can find us on social media at Transcend Trees. That's pretty much it.
Well, I would like to thank you personally for doing what you're doing. I think that this is such a beautiful cause I think about my two kids. When I think about what you're doing, I think about the future that they're going to experience. And it's people like you that are actually, doing the work and making positive things happen for them, not just for us, but for them, for generations in the future. And I'm very grateful. So I would like to thank you so much for coming. And I apologize for the technical difficulties, but we'll get it figured out.
Can you guys?
No big deal. He's asking what when you're a future Transcend customer, which I'm assuming you will be, what tree would you be, and what do you feel that represents?
It's an evolving answer. I mean, I think like some of my favorite trees in the world are the live oaks down that you find in like Savannah and the South. They're just gorgeous. They live for 200-300 years. And they just have that Spanish moss kind of effect. I also love weeping willows, and in the Northeast, being a weeping willow would be wonderful. But you start to think about the longevity of weeping willows, and they don't live as long. And it's like, what do you want to optimize for? And so it's a dynamic and ever-changing answer. But I think right now live oak is with some nice dripping Spanish moss on it is kind of my preferred tree.
Beautiful choice. Yeah, I can picture it now. Yeah, that's it wouldn't do so well up here in Minnesota, but we have other pretty good ones. A lot more piney up here, but
yes.
Pine trees are great too. So they're all great. I mean, I can't think of a bad tree. So,
exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Matthew, and we hope to talk to you more in the future as things kind of progress. And I wish you nothing but success. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed. Thanks, Matt.
All right, talk to you later.
Everyone. Bye.
Well, folks, there you have it. Even with a few technical difficulties, we hope you've come away with a better understanding of Matthew Kochmann's mission to honor the dead by bringing back our forests. It's really so simple, though. Most people buried under even the grandest of man-made monuments are essentially forgotten. Sure, the stone stays, but aside from being a historical curiosity, what's its purpose? A tree, or even a forest on the other hand, well, that stays too, but it stays in the form of generations of new life and ensures the wilderness it holds will thrive for years, possibly centuries to come. Now that's something that has meaning, and Matthew's mission with Transcend, well, that's something I can get behind. It's something I want for myself, and I hope you do too. So give him a call and be a light for a brighter future. We hope to stay in touch with Matthew to admire his progress, but until then, we hope you'll check out the next episode of the Better Death Collective podcast and follow us on social media. Thanks for watching or listening, and we'll see you again soon.